Hello, welcome to Biology, the scientific study of life. Landscape and regional conservation aim to sustain entire biotas. Historically, most preservation efforts have focused on saving endangered species, but increasingly, conservation biology aims to sustain the biodiversity of entire communities, ecosystems, and landscapes. Such a broad view requires understanding and applying the principles of community ecosystem and landscape ecology as well as human population dynamics and economics. One goal of landscape ecology, of which ecosystem management is part, is to understand past, present, and future patterns of landscape use and to make biodiversity conservation part of land use planning. Landscape structure and biodiversity. The biodiversity of a given landscape is in large part a function of the structure of the landscape. Understanding landscape dynamics is critically important in conservation because many species use more than one kind of ecosystem and many live on the borders between ecosystems. Fragmentation and edges. The boundaries of or edges between ecosystems, between a lake and the surrounding forest, for example, or between cropland and suburban housing tracts, and within ecosystems, roadside and rock outcroppings, for instance, are defining features of landscape, as shown in this figure. Um, an edge has its own set of physical conditions which differ from those on either side of it. For instance, the soil surface of an edge between a forest patch and a burned area receives more sunlight and is usually hotter than drier than the forest interior, but it is cooler and wetter than the soil surface in the burned area. Some organisms thrive in edge communities because they have access to the resources of both adjacent areas. For instance, the roughed grouse, Bonas amblatus, is a bird that needs forest habitat for nesting, winter food, and shelter, but it also needs forest openings with dense shrubs and herbs for summer food. White-tailed deer also thrived in edge habitats where they can browse nude shrubs. Deer populations often expand when forests are logged and more edges are exposed. The proliferation of edge species can have positive or negative effects on communities' biodiversity. For example, in 1997 study in Cameroon comparing edge and anterior populations of the little green ball, a tropical rainforest bird, suggested that forest edges may be important sites of speciation. On the other hand, communities in which edges have resulted from human alterations often have reduced biodiversity because the relatively large percentage of edge habitat leads to a preponderance of edge adapted species. For example, the brown-headed cowbird Molthros ater is an age-adapted species that lays its eggs in the nests of other birds, particularly migratory songbirds. Cowbirds need forests where they can parasite the nests of the other birds, and also open fields where they forage on insects. Thus, their populations are burgeoning where forests are being heavily cut and fragmented, creating more edge habitat and open land. Increasing cowbird parasitism and loss of habitat are correlated with declining populations of several of the cowbird's host species. The influence of fragmentation on the structure communities has been explored for 2 decades in the long-term biological dynamics of forest fragments project. Located in the heart of the Amazon River Basin, approximately 80 kilometers north of the city of Manaus, the study area consists of a series of forest fragments, as shown in this video. The fragments are isolated patches of forest separated from surrounding continuous tropical rainforest by distances of 80 to 1,000 meters. Researchers from all over the world have clearly documented the physical and biological effects of this fragmentation in taxa ranging from bryophytes and beetles to bears. Among their findings is the repeated discovery of two groups of species: those that live in forest edge habitats and those that live in the forest interior. Species adapted to forest interiors show the greatest declines in the smallest fragments, suggesting that landscapes dominated by small fragments will support fewer species, mainly due to a loss of anterior adapted species. Corridor that connect habitat fragments. Where habitats have been severely fragmented, the presence of the movement corridor, a narrow strip or series of small clumps of equality habitat connecting otherwise isolated patches, can be the deciding factor in conserving biodiversity. Streamside habitats often serve as corridors, and in some nations, government policy prohibits destruction of these riparian areas. In areas of heavy human use, artificial corridors are sometimes constructed. For example, bridges of tunnels or tunnels can reduce the number of animals killed trying to cross highways. As shown in this figure, this is one example. Movement corridors also can promote dispersal and reduce inbreeding in declining populations. Corridors have been shown to increase the exchange of individuals among subpopulations of metapopulation in organisms, including butterflies, voles, and various aquatic plants. Corridors are especially important to species that migrate between different habitats seasonally. However, a corridor can also be harmful, so as for example in the spread of disease, especially among small populations in closely situated habitats. Bashes in a 23 study, Augustin Estrada Bena of the University of Zaragoza, Spain, showed that habitat corridors facilitate the movement of disease-carrying ticks among forest patches in northern Spain. All the effects um, of corridors are not yet understood, and their impact is an area of active research in conservation biology and restoration ecology.